How do you make an entire convoy of tanks, trucks, and soldiers vanish in plain sight? It sounds like something out of a magician's act. But in the chaos of World War II, it wasn't sleight of hand. It was something far more audacious, something that took nerves of steel, gallons of paint, and a little British mischief. Let me tell you about a man named Geoffrey Barkas. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even a soldier, really. Not at first. He was a filmmaker, a set designer. Before the war, he made movies for a living. But when the shooting started, Barkas didn't pick up a rifle. He picked up a paintbrush and disappeared an entire army. It started in North Africa, 1942. The British Eighth Army was in a bad spot. The German Afrika Korps, under Rommel, the Desert Fox, was hammering them across the burning sand. Every tank counted, every truck, every crate of ammo had to move under open skies, and Rommel's Luftwaffe had eyes everywhere. Barkas had been brought in to command something the top brass barely understood, the Camouflage Development and Training Center. His job? Figure out how to stop the enemy from seeing what was right in front of them. But what he proposed? It sounded insane. Instead of hiding tanks, he wanted to make them look like trucks. It wasn't just clever. It was desperate. Because in just weeks, British forces were preparing for a major offensive at El Alamein. Surprise was their only chance. If Rommel caught wind of their armor moving into place, the whole plan would unravel before it began. And that's when Barkas and his misfit crew of artists, engineers, and mechanics, nicknamed the Magic Gang, pulled off one of the most bizarre operations of the entire war. The plan hinged on a single, almost laughable idea. If you can't hide the tanks, lie about what they are. But could they really fool German reconnaissance planes with cardboard, with paint? The answer wasn't just yes. It was something much bigger. The thing about Geoffrey Barkas was he understood storytelling. He knew how to sell an illusion, and war, in its own brutal way, is all about deception. His team, many of them former painters, architects, even theater set builders, started experimenting out in the Libyan desert, not in labs or factories, but right there in the sand, under the same sun that cooked metal and blinded pilots. Their mission? Create a dummy truck that could fit over a real tank, and do it fast, cheap, and under pressure. The result was something they called the Sun Shield. Picture this: a life-size shell made of canvas and wood, shaped like a harmless supply truck. Light enough for a couple of men to lift, but convincing enough to fool a German pilot screaming overhead at 300 miles an hour. They painted windows on the sides, added fake shadows, even used real oil stains to sell the look. Every detail mattered. They didn't just build these covers, they acted out an entire routine. Drivers wore fake uniforms, set up phony supply camps, and even laid down fake tire tracks. It was theater for an audience of Luftwaffe spotters. But this wasn't just a one-off stunt. Barkas and his Magic Gang were covering hundreds of tanks in preparation for Operation Lightfoot, the British counterattack at El Alamein. Each night, under cover of darkness, real tanks would roll into new forward positions. And at dawn, the dummy trucks stayed behind, making it look like nothing had moved. Meanwhile, empty trucks elsewhere would be covered with fake tank shells, tricking German intelligence into thinking the armor was somewhere else entirely. Rommel was watching. He had his scouts, his cameras, his analysts, and he had no idea. Not yet, anyway, because just days before the offensive, something happened. Something Barkas hadn't planned for. Something that nearly unraveled everything. The desert doesn't keep secrets easily. Wind shifts, sand moves, tracks appear where they shouldn't. And one morning, just 3 days before the launch of Operation Lightfoot, German reconnaissance photographed something that didn't add up. They spotted a supply convoy, dozens of harmless trucks sitting in neat rows. But the shadows were wrong. Subtle inconsistencies. A few too many hard angles. Some of the trucks didn't cast shadows at all. It was just enough to raise suspicion at Rommel's headquarters. And suddenly, the illusion that had taken weeks to build was on the verge of collapse. If the Germans realized those weren't trucks, if they figured out the tanks had already moved into attack position, the element of surprise, the only real advantage the British had, would vanish. Geoffrey Barkas was told to shut the whole thing down, scrap the deception, retreat, and regroup. But he didn't. Instead, he gambled. That very night, he ordered the team to go bolder, not just reinforce the illusions, exaggerate them, make them so obvious, so mundane, that no one would second-guess them. More dummy tents, more phony mess halls. Barkas even added a fake water station, something no armored division would ever prioritize. In a cruel twist of logic, the more ridiculous the setup looked, the more believable it became. And it worked. Rommel's scouts chalked it up to typical British logistics. Nothing to see here, business as usual, and in the days that followed, the Africa Corps never shifted to meet the actual armored advance brewing in the shadows. So when the real attack began on the night of October 23, 1942, with over 200,000 Allied troops and 1,000 tanks, the Germans were caught flat-footed. The Battle of El Alamein wasn't easy. It was brutal, but it marked the beginning of the end for Axis control in North Africa. And it started with cardboard, paint, and the guts to bluff a desert fox. But what happened to Barkas and his strange band of artists after the victory? The answer might surprise you. After El Alamein, Geoffrey Barkas didn't return to making movies. Not yet. Because suddenly, the quiet little camouflage unit nobody paid much attention to was at the center of something much bigger. The Magic Gang had proven that deception wasn't just a side act. It was a battlefield strategy. And it worked. What started as an eccentric experiment in the North African desert now caught the eye of generals and planners all the way in London and Washington. Barkas was soon pulled into more operations, some so secret they weren't spoken about for decades. But he never became a household name. He wasn't the kind of man who chased medals. He was more interested in how illusions worked, what made the human eye believe something was real, what made the human mind buy into a lie. And for the rest of the war, the Allies doubled down on this strange weapon. The Americans created the Ghost Army, a mobile deception unit inspired by Barkas's work, complete with inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, even actors trained to pose as generals. In 1944, they'd help mislead the Germans about the location of the D-Day landings. And once again, a bit of theater would save thousands of lives. But Barkas? He stayed behind the curtain. No parades, no public speeches. After the war, he quietly went back to filmmaking, though you get the feeling he never really saw movies the same way again. Years later, he said something simple, almost offhand. The best camouflage is not about hiding, it's about making someone believe what they want to see. That's the thread running through this whole story. Courage didn't just come from those charging into battle, it came from those willing to bet everything on an illusion. To stand in the open desert with only a wooden shell and a paintbrush between them and the Luftwaffe. So much of war is brutal, raw, and unimaginably tragic. But every now and then, it makes room for something else, for ingenuity, mischief, and a strange kind of hope. Because sometimes the most human thing you can do in war is fool the other guy into not shooting. What would you have done in that moment, knowing your canvas and brush might save a battalion? If this story made you see World War II in a new light, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. More true stories are waiting, and not all of them are what they seem.